hello then, I do hope you're all well. Now is this a masterclass in how to say absolutely nothing with words and look intelligent? Now, this is the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey. He was at an Economic Affairs Committee meeting where a Lord Rickard wanted to take him back to a time when our Liz Truss and KamiKwasi Kwartengs mini budget, and let's just say it was just like trying to get blood out of a stone.
Governor, I want to take you back to the 44 days of the Truss government. I mean, looking back now, and it's not hindsight, but it wasn't normal. First day before the Chancellor got into his seat, he sacked the Perm Sec. There were quite clearly briefings from the government against the bank and against yourself. And the Treasury did not give the bank the normal briefings that would normally happen before major financial statements, whether they were budgets or not. So the question is, why wasn't there, with all these warnings and negatives that weren't normal, why wasn't there better coordination between the bank and the Treasury before the mini budget at the end of the week to prevent the need for the short notice, large-scale intervention by the bank? I mean, we haven't really, and I haven't seen a satisfactory explanation of what the process is between the bank and the Treasury in this respect.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm sure I'm probably stating the obvious, but this was a quite extraordinary time. Can I be very clear? I have no doubt in my mind that Treasury officials told the Bank of England and told me everything they knew. So there was no question of anything being hidden, as far as I know, between Treasury officials and the Bank of England. But let me say two things.
Sorry, I just need to jump in on that. Sorry. What you're saying is Treasury officials told the Bank of England officials everything they knew. So there was someone else in the Treasury, not Treasury officials.
On to that.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I would say two things. First of all, and I have to say, I think we've seen this by some of the commentary from the former Prime Minister and the former Chancellor, is that the lack of clarity between them as to what was actually going to be in this statement, I think illustrates the problem. It was not known. It was just not clear what was going to be in this statement. The second thing, and this is very important from our point of view, and a point I made in a statement I made on the Monday immediately afterwards, is that by not involving the Office for Budget Responsibility in the process, that took away a good deal of the substance that we rely upon to go with a budget from the point of view of forecasting and understanding the impact of measures that are being taken, and that was just not there. There was nothing in that sense. So I can well understand, you're very right to ask the question, but I would be very clear, this was a most extraordinary process in that sense.
Are you saying, you very careful use of words about Treasury officials, I mean, somebody knew what the Chancellor was going to do. Are you saying you had no advance warning of, what was it, the £46 billion of unfunded tax cuts? You had no one in the bank.
Well, I knew what had been said, particularly by the Prime Minister during the leadership campaign, where there had been obviously signals given about what the intent of policy was going to be. But we did not know what was going to be in the statement. We had some ideas, and some things I think were sort of probably better ideas than others. But I'm afraid there were parts of it we had no idea what was in it.
So just to be clear, which ideas did you know? I mean, what did you actually know?
Well, I think some bits of it had been sort of pre-announced or at least trailed around. So I think there were some pieces that were.
Forgive me for saying it sounds quite. How should I put it? The word that springs to mind is slapdash. That someone said bits of ideas are coming out. Well, just let me finish. I mean, I'm not saying it's necessarily your fault, but what I'm trying to get at here is what the Treasury were telling you. Was there a formal communication in any shape or form detailing items that were announced in that mini budget?
There was no formal communication of the sort we normally have, and it was a quite extraordinary process in that sense. And just to reiterate the point that although of course it's not by no means the only part of it, the absence of the OBR part of that in a sense underlined that lack of sort of structured communication and presentation. It was just not there.
Yeah. Julian, can I just a final point? During that week, it was quite unusual in my experience for a big statement like that to be made so late in the week. It'd be normally Tuesday, Wednesday. This was a Thursday, if I remember right.
Friday.
It was a Friday. It was the very end of the week. Yeah, which was very unusual. Like on the Monday, it was known it was going to take place. It was known the OBR had been sidelined. You were obviously aware of the criticism second-hand from the government of the OBR, the bank and everything else. Did you make any formal request to the Chancellor or the Treasury to get it, for your own audit trail, to get it on the record that you, the bank, needed some advance information?
Well, can I just, I mean, it's not for me to speak for the former government, but can I just make a couple of points? Of course, it wasn't a normal week because Monday was the Queen's funeral. So, to be clear, and I think the government, and I think Parliament went into recess actually at the end of that Friday, as I remember rightly. So I think there was quite a lot of desire to get a lot of things into that week, because I think, I'm not an expert on it, so I don't think the Commons normally, certainly budgets don't normally appear on Fridays in normal circumstances. But it was of course, obviously a quite different week in that sense. First of all, well, look, I can only reiterate what I've said. As is well known, because the then Chancellor said it quite often. He and I did talk quite often, but it was not at all clear to me what was going to be in this statement. Well, I can only tell that to you.
Lord Foxwicks, do you want to comment?
Well, without over-labouring this, I mean, the point that Lord Rooker made, did you make representations formally, either to the Treasury or to the Chancellor, that you needed to have detailed advance knowledge as to what was going to be presented that Friday?
I didn't say to the Chancellor, you have to tell me what's going to be in this fiscal statement, because frankly I would never say that to a Chancellor, but then I don't need to say that to in normal circumstances. We have channels of communication.
Clearly not in this case.
No, it wasn't happening in this case. I would just reiterate the point of context I made. Obviously it was an abnormal week in that sense. But no, we would normally not be in this situation. I'm afraid it was a very abnormal situation.
Baroness Nix, you want to come in?
Can I just clarify, Governor? It wasn't a budget. It was a
fiscal event.
Fiscal event, and it was never intended to be a full-scale budget, because it was clearly signalled in advance that the financial strategy would come at a later stage. Was there a reasonable expectation that you would get the kind of information that you'll get on a budget?
No.
So we are talking about a situation where there was no natural expectation you would get that normal level of information.
No, I mean, it's a very fair point you make, and I don't want to be judgmental about this, because the reason that obviously I think it was termed a fiscal event rather than a budget is because if it was a budget, then the OBR would have to be involved because of the piece of legislation that governs the operation of the OBR. So it was not termed a budget. There may have been other reasons why it was not termed a budget. For that reason alone, it was not a budget.
Thank you.
If you just let me try and you on the hindsight, I know you don't like hindsight, but if you had known, what would have been different? Because John Cunliffe said, while fiscal policy is not our responsibility, it affects the economy, we need to factor it in. How would it have been factored into your decision making and your actions if you'd known that this was coming?
Well, we had a meeting, the MPC had met actually the day before this event, so we announced our monetary policy decision on the Thursday when the fiscal event was on the Friday. So if we had known, of course, we would have been more able. It wasn't a monetary policy round with a forecast and a monetary policy report, but we would have been able to factor it in more. And that's why, by the way, we made very clear in what we said on the day before that we would obviously have to factor it in the following round, which was the beginning of November round.
Lord King.
The MPC met on the Thursday, the day before the mini-budget. The convention, very clear convention, would have been that a Treasury official was present at that meeting.
And they were.
And would have briefed the MPC not on individual tax measures, but on the overall scale of changes in the balance between taxes and spending. Was there a Treasury official meeting at that meeting?
Yes, there was, yes.
And did that official brief the MPC on the broad scale of the measures?
Well, let me take that in two parts. I think it's fair to say and it's why I said what I said at the beginning, that I don't think Treasury officials were clear what was going to be in it at that point. I mean, I think that has to be clear. And this is, I think, supported by commentary from the then Chancellor and the then Prime Minister.
Even a day before that,
I don't
senior
think it
Treasury
was
officials
settled.
did not know what was going to be.
No, I don't think it was settled at that time.
So there was no overall sense, on Lord King's point, about what was being to be done in 24.
Well, that's my second point, that of course it's very hard, I think, to draw a strong message on the overall extent without having the OBR involvement in something that's that sizable.
But I mean, this practice of a senior official, Treasury official, briefing the MPC actually predates the OBR. So there was a tradition in which Treasury officials would give clear guidance to the MPC as to what was the likely overall economic impact, even though they were not free to describe a lot of individual tax measures and go into enormous detail. But with a change of that magnitude, it certainly would have been normal for a Treasury official to tell the MPC, hey, something quite big is going to be announced tomorrow. I can't tell you perhaps a precise number, but it's going to be big. And it would have been very unusual for the Treasury official to come back the next month and say, I'm very sorry, I forgot to tell you last month.
I mean, I must be clear, the Treasury official, I think, told us what they understood to be the situation.
And what size of giveaway did they
Well, going back to your point about the OBR, of course, in the pre-OBR days, the functions of the OBR were performed within the Treasury. The Treasury doesn't have that function now anymore, so they can't do that themselves. And I think this was one of the great frustrations of it, that what I would call the economic analysis that went with it was not there.
Mm-hmm. But there were ready reckoners, which even the Treasury now have, which would have enabled them to say, this is either a very small tax giveaway or it's a very big one.
I think.
Did they say it was a very
I
big
think
one?
Remember at the time, I mean, there was obviously there was speculation that this was going to be quite a substantial package. There was no great secret about that. What I think certainly in our position on the MPC was that we did not know how big it was going to be and how substantial. And we were quite careful, I think, in the language we chose, we used in describing the outcome of our meeting to be clear that we knew this was coming and that it would have to be factored in the following meeting.
What was the biggest surprise to you? The actual announcements in the mini budget or the market response to those announcements?
Well, that's a good question in terms of relative judgments. I think it's interesting. I did ask a number of people in the market, senior people in the market, what had surprised them given what they knew about it before it happened. Mm-hmm. The answer I got was twofold, two parts. Although one of which actually they did know, but they obviously hadn't factored in, which was I think it was not only the absence of the OBR, but it was the sort of positive, we don't want the OBR involved message that came across. And many people gave to me the sort of the flying blind analogy. The second one, interestingly, was the abolition of the top rate of tax, personal taxation, which, by the way, was something that we certainly had no idea was going to happen. Now,
I don't think you would normally have been told that in advance. That's a specific measure which...
But that's the point. I mean, these were... That's really, in a sense, the kernel of this discussion, that all they had was a set of specific measures. They didn't have the economic... I fully take your point, because this is how it normally happens. We don't need to necessarily know the detailed measures. What we need to know is the economic impact of them. But that wasn't there, because there was no OBR. But just going back to top rate of tax, it's interesting because in a way, in economic terms, it's probably not the biggest thing that was in that package because it's a low marginal propensity to consume for that group. What people said to me was they were surprised, substantially surprised, that it was done at that point in time, in that context, in that situation. And people in the market said that those two things had quite a big impact on them in terms of their reaction to it and their sort of judgment on the direction of UK economic policy, more fiscal policy making at that time, which was obviously very negative.
Thank you.
I could be so wide of the map, but that was, to me, a masterclass of contradictions and obfuscating. He clearly didn't want to give too much away. Well, that's what it seemed like to me. And he just seemed to just lead him right to a right merry dance. I found it quite hilariously funny to a point, but then I realised the damage that Liz Truss and KamiKwasi Kwartengs did during their short tenure. You know, the people who, who had their dream homes just frittered away within an instant because of their absolute incompetence. And it's no laughing matter, is it, to those who were affected by it? But anyway, I just watched it with fascination. But what do you guys think? Just let me know in the comments below. And until the next time, I shall bid you farewell and take care.